Welcome back to The Restless Show. My name is Father Joseph Gill, and I'm here with Lauren, Diane, and Paul. And today we're diving into one of the great virtues, in fact, perhaps the greatest virtue. You know, we live in a world that's very self-aggrandizing. You know, on social media, you're always putting yourself out there, your best foot forward. You always want to have those great photographs and these statuses that make your life seem awesome. And that kind of goes against this great virtue, which is the virtue of humility. And it's an important virtue, but a virtue that's sometimes tough to have in a world that says put yourself first and make yourself out there. And you know, some of the greatest spiritual writers have often said that humility is the greatest and the most important of all the virtues. And sometimes when people hear that, they say, well, wait a second, what about, charity? What about, patience or all these other virtues? I mean, what do you guys think about that? Humility being the greatest and most important of the virtues.
Well, I reflected on that, just last night, and my sense is that, humility is putting yourself before God, right? Recognizing that He is our creator and we only exist because of Him, right? You have to have some sense of humility to understand that. So if you can do that, then you can live out a Christian faith that is charitable and loving and patient and all these other things. But if you're not humble, then you may fall into thinking, you rule your own life, like you are the reason why you are so great and you alone, and that can be a dangerous path to go down.
I work at a Catholic summer camp during the summers called Camp Veritas, and their slogan is, there is a God and I'm not Him. And if they learn one lesson that whole week, and it's that lesson, then it's been a successful week. That's a good point, Lauren.
Yeah, and if you think about it too, I guess the vice, right? So pride is what changed angels into devils, right? And it's the cause of Adam's, the fall. So if you think a bit about it as sort of the, of causing that, I think that, the opposite, the virtue, humility is, I guess, inevitably the most important.
Yeah, definitely.
So recently, our young adult group here in Stamford did a monthly series on the 7 deadly sins. And we start with, as most times do, you start with pride and humility, because it's the root of all, because pride tends to be the root of all sin, and humility tends to be a great cure for all sin, or a great offsetting virtue. And as we worked through the months in each of the 7 deadly sins, we always came back to humility, as even if you're thinking about gluttony, and it's a worldly desire for food or nutrition, you're putting that above God. You're putting your desire for excess food, let's say, above that of your desire for the love of God. And the way the offset is that is humility in a sense, or fasting or whatever. But that's a way of humbling yourself in that sense.
So it sounds like you're all saying that what humility is then is recognizing your place in the cosmos, like that you are not God, that there is a higher power that you have to answer to.
Yeah, that's what I think of when it's put forth as this is the most important virtue, right? That's got to be, at least in my understanding, the most important thing. And in one sense, it seems so obvious, right? Like, of course, like God created us. He's what's most important. The first commandment, right? Love Him with all your heart and mind and soul and everything. And yet I feel like society, the world we live in, God is taken out of most things, right? And it's like success driven, career, status, materialistic, how much you own, like getting that house, the new car, right? And God is not present. So you can just see, I think, looking in our lives and the world, how the world is, that if God is not there, you can just forget Him, right?
And I think even a lot of people that would say that they have God in their life really put themselves first.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I can also, building on that, I think you could be a religious person. You could be someone that goes to church. You could be someone that has prayer in your life. And that's one part of your life and that's something you access. But then you can still be someone who thinks that you control your own life, right? And you're still focused on, worldly things, right? And not spiritual things. So the true, I guess, religious, spiritual life is having your faith as the foundation, right? Underneath everything. And I don't know. For me, that's something that I've recognized. It's something I've had to learn that I could be better at. even though I thought like, oh, I've been a Catholic my whole life. Yes, God's in my life. Like, but I would forget him or leave him out and become prideful. Yeah. So
And
he's got to be the foundation.
And I think you said something, it's like your ordered place in the cosmos or something like that is the term you use. But I think it's different than when you think about like Greek mythology and you have the gods on top of Mount Olympus and the people are afraid of the gods and the wrath that they can do, that those gods can exert on the people. But I think it's more of its ordered place, knowing that, you know, your prideful desires, that you want to empty yourself of your pride so that you can fill yourself up with the love of God. So you humble yourself to that extent so that you can be the most receptive to that love. So it's not just an order of like, well, God is like, you know, he's up on top of Olympus and I have to be afraid and I don't know this and I, you know, it's mysterious. It's more of, well, we know that God loves us and we want to be able to fill ourselves up with that as much as possible.
So that's interesting because that kind of touches on the virtue of fear of the Lord. You know, which I think
every virtue is can be summarized with humility, right?
Right.
Yeah, it works. Yeah.
Yeah, fear of the Lord is not, God, I'm scared. No, it's
right.
It's recognizing that, yeah, we are not him, but we need him and we want him in our life. Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, so I mean, have you guys ever met somebody that's truly humble? Diane is shaking her head no.
I mean,
everyone met self-centered.
I just think that, I mean, definitely, I feel like I listen to humble people through podcasts, just like, I mean, I think of like the Sisters of Life, the Franciscan friars, but honestly, humility, just preparing for this, it's this podcast episode, it's something that we all have to work on every day, because to detach from yourself is one of the hardest things to do. And even if you kind of think that you're on the road, there's always something that's kind of like, you know, not that you're making yourself a god, but that you're, you know, it's so hard to get out of yourself. So I think that, you know, I don't know that I've come across an incredibly humble person, you know, who just credits all of the goods and the talent that they have to God, and kind of, you know, wants to work on that in order to glorify him. I don't know that necessarily even outward appearances, if the motive of glorifying God is really there. I don't know that any of us can really know that. I've certainly come across very charitable people and people who seem that like they are very in love with God, but from what I've read of the saints and everything, it's just the struggle against self is to the death. And I think it's something that, like, I don't know, it gives us a lot to work on in everyday life, because there's always things that come up that kind of make us, you know, come back to ourselves.
Wow. That's kind of true, but also it's kind of sad that nobody's
well, I think, you know, if it's somebody who's truly humble, right, you would think of like 100% humble, then well, you probably would only say that there was two like humans that ever occupied that particular position of being able to claim such a virtue. But I think that, I mean, obviously we can always look to the saints, that we can find somebody who is, you know, 95% humble or something like that, that has truly given up everything for God. I don't think I've ever, you know, I don't think I've ever met somebody like that. But certainly have met people that are close or closer.
Any come to mind immediately?
You know, I think it's similar to what Diane said. I think it's, you know, a lot of the religious folks that we meet they just ooze this like charismatic love of God, and they're just willing to put everything ahead of themselves. And that's, you know, either Sister of Life or Franciscan friars or any of the folks, or I think the ones that I think the folks that really have resonated are a lot of the folks that I've had relationships with in terms of the Franciscan friars up in Meriden, Connecticut. They have they're working sisters and brothers. They teach, and they have a Franciscan Life Center, and those people they literally do everything outside of themselves to help children or to help people that have depression or anything, and they put it all out on the line. So those people I've met are really quite humble.
So I wonder if the vow they take of obedience is a way to foster humility. You know, because when you're obeying a superior, you're really giving up your will completely and saying, I'm not living this life for myself anymore. It's completely, totally given away. Lauren, you look like you had something to add.
Well, No, I totally agree with that. I think obedience, following, anyone above you, bosses, parents, whoever it might be, is a way to grow in humility, because you can't do what you want. You have to do what they want you to do. And my experience with meeting, a humble person is from my retreat back in Spain, where I met many of the sisters, but one in particular, Sister Antonia. We've continued to talk about monthly through Skype. And so I've built a friendship with her, but it's just astonishing to me, right? That like, she's American, she grew up here, she went to school here, she worked here, and she left her life completely to join a religious community, so all of her possessions, her wealth, her family, everything, right? And she took that vow of obedience. She follows the rules of, their community. Obviously, they're supported by where they live, so the food is donated. They don't get to choose their clothing. And I thought of this the other day, like, I'm a pretty athletic person, and whatever, I'll use a foam roller, or let's say there'll be like something new that'll come out, be like, oh, I want that. That'll help me with like all my knots. But if I was in religious life, I couldn't just say, oh, I need to go get that for myself, right? Like
true.
You don't get to choose what you buy. And I just thought, wow, that'd be crazy, because right now I have the freedom to get whatever I want or whatever I might need. I'm not obedient to an authority like that. So it's pretty astonishing, that people can put up so much, give so much of themselves and sacrifice so much to serve their community and to serve God.
I remember when I was in seminary at Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, I was in seminary with some of the Franciscans of the Primitive Observance, which was a community that, truth be told, I'm not sure if they're still around, but they actually broke off of the CFRs because of a refrigerator. They thought that having a refrigerator was not against, it was against what St. Francis would have wanted. so they said, let's go even harder core. And the CFRs are pretty hardcore, Franciscan friars. So they walked everywhere. They didn't accept rides unless it was like more than 10 miles that they had to get to. And they went around begging for food. So they would often, it was funny that the guy I was in seminary with was Brother Andrew, and he would often be standing outside the cafeteria begging us seminarians, like, can you buy me lunch today? Can you buy me dinner today? Because he had to beg for food. And what humility. I've never had to beg for anything in my life. I've always been, I'm independent. I got a bank account. I can, get whatever I need, whatever I want. He's completely dependent on others.
And one interesting quote too, it kind of reminds me of, I was looking into this, and Mother Teresa, I guess, used to talk about humility in terms of like being a pencil in the hand of God, of just like, what you and Lauren are talking about in terms of like just allowing him to lead and write your story and not having preferences or attachments to one way or another. So I think humility is such an amazing virtue, and it's something that like the more you think about, you can always go deeper, like you think you hit it and then it's like not even close.
I know, once you think you've obtained humility,
You're
that's
not.
the first sign you haven't.
Exactly. But there's always something to work on,
Yeah.
There's always more to detach from.
Speaking of Mother Teresa, I remember a great story. Before she won the Nobel Peace Prize, she was in Oslo, Norway, about to receive it. And they couldn't find her. They're like, where'd she go? And I mean, she's like 4'2", so it's kind of easy to lose her, So they're like going through this convention center trying to find where Mother Teresa went. And finally, somebody found this tiny little closet, like this broom closet, and they went in there and they found her. And she was praying, and her back to the door, and she kept repeating the one word over and over again: humility, humility, humility. Because she knew she was about to be on the biggest stage of her life and to receive this prize and win all kinds of accolades and be on the front page of Times Magazine. She's like, got to keep it humble.
No, that's so amazing.
Yeah.
So she was basically preparing herself, right, in her spirit to remain humble before this huge moment was about to happen.
Yeah.
And like, who of us does that? Like,
I know.
it's so backwards from how we all...
shaking everybody's hand, being like, hey, look at me. I just won a Nobel Peace Prize. But that's Mother Teresa for you. So when you're thinking about a humble person, like what characteristics make them humble? Like, what are their actions or words that kind of, you're like, wow, that's a humble action. That's a humble person. Because I think humility can be very much misunderstood. As somebody that just hangs their head all the time or stays silent and doesn't talk.
Well, I know, we were just talking about Mother Teresa, right? So some of the things that she kind of suggested in terms of like how to grow in humility were, speak as little as possible about yourself, keep busy with your own affairs and not those of others, avoid curiosity, wanting to know things about other people that don't concern you, accept small irritations with good humor, don't dwell on the faults of others, accept censures even if unmerited, accept insults and injuries, accept contempt, being forgotten, disregarded, be courteous and delicate, don't seek to be admired or loved, and, don't protect yourself behind your own dignity, choose the more difficult tasks. So just, I guess, things like that. There's so many different aspects of, humility is just, I guess you can't box it in. It's very encompassing.
Those are some really practical ideas.
Yeah. And I think like the litany of humility is very good. I just remember Father Indy talking about it in one homily, and he's like, just, if you're going to pray that prayer, be prepared to, be prepared for what, is going to happen. Because I think in reality, the only way you grow in humility is by being humble. And, it's not like God is going to grant you this, virtue of humility and, it's some magic power. It's like, no, it's humiliations that make you grow in virtue. So,
yeah. Speaking of Mother Teresa, a real quick story before the break. I remember hearing a story of Mother Teresa going around begging door to door for some of her orphans or maybe some of her poor. And she came upon this very wealthy person who just had a heart of stone and didn't really care about the poor. And so as she's asking for handouts, this person just goes and spits in her face. And very calmly, she wipes it off and she says, "That's for me. Now what about for the poor?"
Wow.
And they're kind of like, wow, okay. And that's humility right there.
Yeah.
Not getting angry, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. We're going to take a break. When we come back, dive deeper into this virtue of humility, how to obtain it.
Hey, did you know you can take Veritas Catholic Network with you wherever you go? All you have to do is download the Veritas Catholic Network app. Then you can listen to the live broadcast 24 hours a day. You can also grab podcasts of our original shows like Let Me Be Frank and Restless, and much more, right at your fingertips and on your phone. Download the Veritas Catholic Network app today at the Apple App Store or on the Google Play Store, or visit www.veritascatholic.com.
Welcome back to Restless, as we four young adults restlessly search for God in the midst of today's crazy world. And we were talking about finding humility in the midst of a world that says, make yourself first, make yourself, self-aggrandize yourself. But I think a lot of people misunderstand humility because they kind of think, well, a humble person just has low self-esteem, right? But of course, that's not the case. Having low self-esteem is not the same as humility. So what exactly is the difference then?
I always looked at the opposite of low self-esteem would be it's not pride necessarily. It's confidence. So you can have high confidence in your humility, because if you have low self-esteem, now there's disorders and mental disorders and things that might accentuate that, and those can be treated different ways. But if you're choosing in a sense to have low self-esteem to exercise humility, that would be like false humility. But you can always be confident. When you mentioned Mother Teresa and getting spat in the face and her ability to wipe it off and just reply right away, that's confidence in humility. So that's the way I think about self-esteem versus humility, low self-esteem versus humility.
So that makes for an interesting question. So if you're at work and you know that you can accomplish some task, or you know that you're better than maybe somebody else at doing it, should you speak up and say, look, perhaps here's a better way, or maybe I can take over for this project? Or is that a prideful thing to say?
It could be. I mean, if it's coming out of a place of if you're the best person to do it, or there's no one else to do it, then perhaps. Now, if you can use that as a training mechanism for somebody else, then that would be a prideful way that you can exercise your knowledge of it and then also train somebody else. So that might be a way of humiliating yourself, but also being confident that you do know how to do it. Because if you think that you don't know how to do it, even though you do, then you're not helping that other person too. Yeah, which is a problem.
Well, Lauren, I know as a professional sports athlete, as a professional ultimate frisbee player, certainly you are better than 99.9% of the people at ultimate frisbee. And how do you stay humble when after a game people are like, wow, that was an amazing play, you had the highlight reels out there?
It's tough. I would say I haven't been humble, and not because of being pro. It was more, I think, for me, it was like actually growing in my self-esteem, like back when I was in college, helped me come out of my shell. And then at the same time, I got really good at ultimate. And then I started thinking like, I'm better than so many people because I was more skilled, you know, I could throw it more consistently. I was reliable, right? I had all these talents on the field. And then in my mind, it was like, I am better. Like I absolutely had that mindset. And it just stayed with me, you know, as I progressed in ultimate. And it's hard. I think, you know, not like bloating yourself up and like, you know, growing your ego is actually easier. Like if something came out, like there have been like an article or two, or I'd be mentioned, or I'd be on a live stream. Like I was excited about that. That was like a great like moment, and it's things I wanted. Like I wanted to progress in my sport. I wanted to be on like as competitive as a team as I could. I wanted to be at nationals. I wanted to win nationals. And then I was doing all those things. And then, you know, things start happening, the live streams and whatever. So that isn't so hard for me, at least, to be like, thank you, you know, to be gracious and not like showboat. But I already had this mindset like, yep, I'm better than you. I'm better than all of you, you know, and it's a tricky thing because in sports,
you are better. You're better than me. Yes, for sure.
Yes. And it's funny too, because you, as an athlete, you need to do that for yourself. Like I've also had moments like I took a month off because I went to go and help out at this Eurostars tour. So I worked for a tour, and I think that's a way too of humbling myself. Like I traveled across the country to serve these other women who were playing and I wasn't playing. But I stopped playing basically for a month, and I came back here and I had my first tournament, and it's the pro championships for USA Ultimate in the club series. So it's all pro teams. That's the highest level in the club division. And I'm thinking, geez, I haven't thrown like in a month. I haven't run. I haven't done anything. Like, and I was getting nervous. And then I switched my mindset and I was like, you are awesome. Like, you were really good. Like, I gave myself that like self-promotion.
Yeah.
And I played really well, you know, and I know there's truth to that just in sports psychology, right? You have to visualize success. You have to tell yourself that you're great. So that is part of sports. But at the same time, then you have to humble yourself, or I think give it up to God, which I think I failed to do, you know? Like to just thank him for all my gifts, or like anytime someone, you know, congratulates you or whatever it is, acknowledges something well, I should do this going forward. Just thank you, God, right? Thank you. Thank you for this gift that you've given me.
Yeah. Because there's a type of false humility where people will always say, oh, well, I'm not really that good at it, you know, and they'll kind of downplay it. I remember a guy in college who was a very good friend with, who actually is a Franciscan brother right now. And he was a phenomenal rap artist. Like this guy could drop a beat, and he was white too. It was really cool. But he was so good. He's actually from Meriden, Connecticut, where Paul's hometown is.
Yeah, well, close by.
Close by.
Cheshire. Yeah.
Cheshire, close enough. But I would be like, you know, because he and I worked together in this inner city youth program, and I'd be like, Rich, dude, just like, you know, drop a beat with these kids. Like they so admire you. He's like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to like put myself out there and be the center of attention. I was like, you're burying your gifts. You know, you got gifts. Don't bury them. That's not humble. God wants you to use your gifts, you know?
Absolutely. Share them with others, right? Or otherwise, why do you have them?
Right. So what are some of the ways that humility could be done wrongly? Any thoughts?
Well, I think the false humility is certainly... That's where it's not. If your humility is to the extent where it stops you from doing something that's good, then that would be a problem. Like if you're because then that would be again false humility, but it also might be just a disordered humility or something that you're not going down the right path. Where if your humility is actually leading you to do like nothing, which is bad, or not good things, which is not as
also
bad, but still bad.
Also bad.
Then it's then there's something that has to be reordered there. And it might be something like building up a confidence or fixing your self-esteem or praying about that in a serious way.
I think about the prophets, you know, when God comes to the prophets and like, all right, go prophesy. What's their first reaction? Not me, Lord, not me. I don't do that. I don't do that. And then that's false humility, right? Because you should be like, Lord, whatever you want. And yeah, the task is too big for them. Of course it is. But God's going to give you the grace to do it. So you're right. Like if someone says, I can't do it. I'm too little. Yes, that's the point.
Right.
That's why God loves to use little people like Mary and Jesus. You know, Jesus was born in a stable. not a palace. True humility. So how can you grow in it? Other than, you mentioned some great examples earlier from Mother Teresa, Diane. Any other thoughts on how to grow in this great virtue?
Well, I mean, I think Rick Warren summarized it very nicely in one sentence. He said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. So in everything that you do, like that just struck me because often we think about ourselves in terms of our preferences and our talents and whatever. But if we sort of, and even like, I don't know, I find this the case, like when you're sick or you're going through some sort of suffering, if you focus on other people as opposed to your own self and like your own suffering, all of a sudden, like you're forgetful of your situation, you feel better, and you're helping somebody else. So, I mean, I think it all comes down to like just thinking of yourself less, honestly. Because we're the center of our own worlds, and I think that the Christian struggle is sort of getting away from that.
Externally focused gratitude is a great first step. So if you do something well, you perform well at the sport, or if you do well at work or in school, not patting yourself on the back in that moment. You can maybe a little bit, it is important to keep your self-esteem high and build your confidence, but also just being thankful. And if you're not at the place where you can thank God for whatever reason, then at least thank your teachers, thank your parents, thank your coworkers, your boss, your trainers, things like that. Just even that little bit is showing that you're relieving the burden of what you've accomplished off of yourself onto somebody else, or to God, which is important.
Sounds like you're making an Oscar speech.
Oh,
I would like to thank all the little people out there.
It's
my mother and father.
Important.
But to really remember, actually. I mean, even Lauren, like with your, ultimate Frisbee, I mean, I think of all these great athletes. You could be hit by a bus tomorrow, or like, not to be morose, but like you can, you can get injured. I think of Roger Federer. I love tennis, and he was at the top for so long. And it's like, you know what? There's always going to be someone better than you, someone younger than you, someone faster than you. So like, you're never like as, I don't know. It's just
most of us, most of humanity, like never at the top, and
you're never
will
at
be.
the top. Yeah. So it's just, your life can change in an instant. You could be dead tomorrow. Like it's these things that like everything comes from God, and just remembering that, that I think that can help you to grow in humility of like, there's always going to be someone better than you, faster than you, and your life is in God's hands, and it can end whenever.
And if anyone that has their whole like life around a sport or activity or something that can be taken away is probably going to fall into a terrible depression, right? Or like lose their whole sense of self if they don't have that thing anymore.
And Lauren, I think you even said that in a past episode of when you had your
my ACL surgeries. Yeah, it was certainly
that was
sad.
Devastating, right? Because your life kind of revolved around ultimate.
Yep.
Yeah. So sometimes
that was one step of God being like, nope. That's not it. That's not all there is. Bring it back to me.
There's a little book that a lot of people have read, but if you haven't, it's Trustful Surrender to Divine Providence. It's 100 pages. It's a tiny book. And it can be very frustrating at times. It's like, if somebody else sins against you and God allowed that to happen, you should be thankful for God thankful to God for letting you experience that travesty or whatever it is. Thankful for that person sinned against you because God allowed it to happen. And it's like, why? I don't want to. It's like, I don't want that person's sin, but it's like, but there's something there that God is providing to you that you can grow. So, and that's humility.
And with that goes, I think, accepting humiliations, right? This is just a turn of mind that I just had. So Father Joseph, I was completely humiliated in the spring because I was cut by my pro ultimate Frisbee team. Yeah. So shocked, it felt unjust. I thought I performed really well at the tryouts. I was on the team the year before. I did really well, and they cut me. So humiliating. And then I went on my retreat, and the sister there was like, you needed that, like God saved your soul to like wake you up and realize, and look, now you're here on this retreat, and I learned all these other things and how much more there is than just my sport and myself, so it was actually a great grace, but in the time it was very difficult.
A wise priest from Arlington, Virginia once told me he always prays, Lord, thank you for loving me in this way whenever he faces adversity or hardship or humiliation. Thank you for loving me in this way, because that's what it is. Well, thanks so much for joining us today as we talked about humility. The challenge is now to go and live that virtue It's not easy, but Mother Teresa gave us some great insights through Diane. And, and it's definitely a virtue that is the kind of foundation of the spiritual life, to recognize that there's a God, we're not him, and we owe everything that we have and everything that we are to him and to his loving mercy. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Radio, 1350 AM, also wherever you get your podcasts. Join us next time on Restless.